So what people should look for. Typically, parents usually know. The teachers will say, oh, just wait, just give it more time. This is mostly for reading. Give it more time, they'll catch up. Well, what happens is they fall farther behind because they don't catch up. And usually the parents say, I had a feeling, I knew, and I listened to the teacher's advice. And now we're in 6th grade or 8th grade or 11th grade, and my kid is on a 3rd grade reading level. Yes. So if you have an inkling that something is amiss with your child, don't listen to the teacher and just give it more time. But so things to look for are, is your child like of average or above average intelligence, but they can't do certain things. If they can't remember sight words, they memorize their spelling tests and for their, the spelling words for their test, and then they forget it 2 weeks later. They can't multiply. They keep practicing and they still can't multiply. They can't get their thoughts on the paper. Those are, obvious things. Things like, as they start to get older, they start to lose interest. They are very often labeled as lazy or dumb. They are not being lazy or dumb. They have just lost hope in themselves because teachers and parents and classmates are berating them, ridiculing them, making them feel less than. And so they are just going to accept their destiny as they can't do it. A lot of times the class clown has dyslexia. And they could also have dysgraphia and dyscalculia. I usually just say dyslexia because that's the most common of the 3. But the class clown is trying to cover up their inability to read because they would rather be considered a jokester than be considered illiterate. And so a lot of times parents will say that their child can read well, but they aren't comprehending the information. Well, they're not necessarily reading well. They can read enough to answer the questions for the test, but they can't read enough to tell you really what they've read.
Right.
I myself in high school, I read the Cliff Notes that for a book instead of reading the book because I couldn't read Shakespeare. There was no way I could read that. So I got the Cliff Notes because I was intelligent enough to say, that's my workaround.
Right.
Dyslexic people are usually out of the box thinkers. So we figure out ways to compensate for our weaknesses and we figure out workarounds. So they're usually athletic or they are creative, musical, theatrical, because everyone has gifts, right? So if you're weaker in one area, you're going to be stronger in another area. So, very often we've got lots of famous athletes, and I'm not a huge athlete.
That's fine.
I don't know a lot of them, but Muhammad Ali is definitely one that comes to mind quickly for me. Actors like Keanu Reeves and Cher, singer, Whoopi Goldberg, they're all dyslexic. Sarah Silverman. So these are your performers who, and like I mentioned before, some of the inventors, many of these people have dyslexia or had dyslexia, and it's their out of the box thinking that helped them come up with Disneyland or the assembly line or different things that your neurotypical person has no clue of, can't imagine even fathom why. I mean, it's like just so far from their thought patterns. NASA hires dyslexic people to work for them because they know they're out of the box thinkers. So,
I didn't know
um,
that.
yeah. So if you think your child might have dyslexia, going to the doctor is not going to make a difference. Doctors are not educated about dyslexia either. It's a neurologist, a child psychologist who are the people who can do the official testing. I just found out that schools don't give an official diagnosis. I never understood that before because you'll never see on a school psychology paper dyslexia. Well, I shouldn't say never. Very, very rarely.
Very rare.
Um, Most of the time, they'll put other learning impaired.
Yes.
Or they'll put auditory processing delay.
Mm-hmm.
And because they don't diagnose, they just write what the symptoms are. So I never understood why they didn't do that until I interviewed a couple of technology assisted technology directors, and they explained that to me. I was like, oh, now I understand. But you don't need an official diagnosis either, because at least in California, it costs between $3,500 and $7,500 to pay someone to give you an official diagnosis. And then you take it to the school and the school won't even do anything with it. I don't know on the East Coast if it's different. Sometimes I've heard on the East Coast, people have gotten their insurance to pay for it, pay for a neurologist or a psychologist to do it. So that is a possibility on the East Coast. On the West Coast, I have never heard of insurance paying for it. So it's not worth it to get a piece of paper that says your child's officially dyslexic and you can't do anything with it because the school won't accept it anyway. I've got a checklist that is available on my website, and parents can fill out the checklist. And if there's at least 3 signs that you check off, then it's likely dyslexia or dysgraphia or dyscalculia. And I also have one for Erlin's syndrome, which I mentioned earlier. And Erlin's syndrome is often one of the causes of the reversals or things moving on the page or them seeing double. So, and my son, my youngest son, I tutored him. He's the whole reason I started on this journey. Was when we were leaving Texas, his teacher said, you need to learn how to teach him in the way he'll understand. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to homeschool him, I'm going to learn to teach him how he needs to learn. So, he learned how to read well. He spells decently, but he still was reversing half of the alphabet and half of the numbers until he went to vision therapy. So that's an ophthalmologist. I think that's who it is. It's not a regular eye exam. It's a an eye doctor who has that extra ability can do it, and then they can do vision therapy. And so he did vision therapy for 1.5 years, and after that it started to help with his depth perception, and he stopped reversing. His handwriting got neater. So those are the things that people think are dyslexia, and they're not. And then a lot of times people will go to a vision therapist expecting their child to leave that being able to read. And if the problem is dyslexia, the vision therapy is not going to correct that.
Right. I mean, and I know for people that are watching, they're like, oh my goodness, so how am I going to put all this together? Because sometimes they rely so much on the teachers because they're like, hey, you went to school for this. You should know how to do this. But I'm going to be truthful. A lot of us general ed teachers, regardless of math and social studies and science and all that, we're learning this as we go along because every class gives us a different scenario because every kid is different. So we might have, one year I had a kid that was an auditory learner. You can put whatever on the board. He was not going to lift his head up, but he will get hundreds on the test because he'll just remember what he heard. And
Mhm.
then you'll have another person that I had to print things on blue paper because the young lady
That's
could not read on
that's the
white paper,
scotopic syndrome, also called Erlin syndrome. That's the
right?
colored overlays and colored paper. Yep.
And I mean, these are things I'm learning year after year because you never know. You never
Mhm.
know who is coming into your classroom, what's coming into your classroom. So just because we're certified to teach in our content, when it comes to like really honing into our special needs population, because it's a family, they're part of you, it's like we have to learn about the kid and really sit down with the student. And there's some teachers that won't do that. They're like, I'm
Mhm.
just here checking in, checking out, that's it. But then you'll have some teachers like us, the educators like us, that will say, you know what? I don't want you to struggle anymore. I really want to understand you. And I remember sitting down with my friend Kathy, who has her whole special ed pop business, which is booming in Massachusetts. And she did like a webinar and to show kids, like show parents and their kids, like how it is to feel to be dyslexic. And there was this one activity with the whole switching of words and all this stuff. And the parent was like, wow. And the kid was right behind, I will never forget this kid, Kyle. I'm going to call him Kyle. He's like, God, so and the kid was like maybe eight, older than 9. And I think the sense of relief in that kid's face that like someone finally understands what I'm going through. And now we can really get down to the learning. Because
Mhm.
sometimes they're like, I'm not making this up, mom. I'm not being lazy. I'm really trying my hardest. And just like how you mentioned, after years and years and years of being called lazy and you're not working hard enough, kids shut down.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they come to me in the 11th grade completely broken. And I'm like, come on, babies. We're going to figure this out. We're going to figure something out and you're going to be okay. And they appreciate that. So, I mean, if anyone thinks, and you're just like, I would say definitely get in touch with Jess for her checklist because that's going to be like essential. I feel like that should be everyone's first step to
Yes.
see
And that's
if
our
that
first step
is.
before we do a consultation call is they fill out the checklist. And usually parents are like, I can see a lot of those signs in me, or I can see a lot of those signs in my husband because it is hereditary. So
Mm-hmm.
um, there's varying degrees. So sometimes mom or dad isn't as severe, or they just no one cared about that stuff back in the 80s. So they just had to figure it out on their own and get by to survive, but they always knew there was something different. Or sometimes we don't realize that our challenges are not everyone's challenges. So those are
Mm-hmm.
like some of the scenarios that happen when people fill out the checklist. They're like, wow, that's me. So
Right?
And that's how I found
So,
out. That's how I found out that myself and my husband were dyslexic. Was when I started tutoring my son. Within 6 months, I was like, "Oh, that's what my reading disability was." Again, my
mm,
mom was a teacher, had no clue that I was dyslexic, but she got me
mm,
tutoring when I was held back in third grade, and then I learned how to read after I got the tutoring. And once the kids get the right type of instruction, they can learn pretty quickly because our students usually come to us um, when it comes to the reading and spelling, they're usually on like 3 grades, 3 to 5 grades behind what grade they're in. So if they're in third grade, they're usually on a kindergarten reading level. Um, After about fifth grade, they're usually on a third grade reading level. Like even if they're 18, 20 years old, they're usually on a third grade reading level because
mm.
that's when they stop teaching kids how to read is third grade. So
Okay.
they never progress on their own beyond where they were taught, because by fourth grade, they're expected to read to learn. So,
Sense.
yeah. So, and with math, I mean, very often we'll have students who they're in fifth grade and they are counting on their fingers still, and they
Mhm.
can't multiply, you know. And right now we've got a student who, she goes to a private school and she failed algebra, so they're having her do algebra and geometry the same year. I said, I
What?
have never heard of that. Yeah. Uh,
No, no, no.
yeah.
It makes
So,
my skin crawl right now. I'm like, no, that's insane.
yeah, yeah. Um, so she's doing algebra and geometry because they don't want her to fall behind again. And so that's why they're making her do geometry. And mom's like, I know she's never going to use it because she's an athlete and she really has no interest in it, but she's got to pass those and get to, algebra 2 and potentially calculus. I don't know.
And I think a lot of the graduation requirements is up to algebra too.
Well,
It
in
also
California,
depends
it's
on
only
that state.
algebra.
Really?
Yeah.
So, like, just so she won't fall behind. So we're gonna stress her completely out by
Yes.
having two separate. So now her brain is gonna have to be like, okay, all right, we're doing algebra. Oh, wait, no, we're doing geometry. Oh, wait, okay. You're easily going to take this equation, mix it up with this process, and then it's going to be a hot mess, if I may put it so basically said. But that's what's happening.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
They live in Nevada, but they're in a private school. And I'm like, you're paying for this. You're
Right. You're paying for the
paying for
torture.
your kid to go through. Yeah.
Like, that's,
So,
oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I would love to talk to that parent. Like, how can I help? Um, But for the most part, because this is just stellar information, and for people just to understand, there is something that can be used for assistance. And I really think and believe that you guys need to reach out to Jess. Definitely. And if anything, how can people reach out to you? How can they reach you?
well, the best way to reach out is to schedule a consultation call. I do a free 30-minute consultation call. Like I said, we will talk about, I don't know about that Jess Arce thing. That takes you
Yeah,
probably to my bio, but if you take off the Jess Arce, that's our website.
sure.
And
I can do that.
um,
Not a problem.
and,
Keep going.
and anyway, so you can schedule a consultation call with me. You'll spend the first 30 minutes, the first 15 minutes telling me about your child, and then I'll spend the next 15 minutes telling you what I think and if we can help, what program I recommend for you. And if we can't help, I am pretty familiar with a lot of neurodiversities at this point. My family has 9. So I can kind of steer you in the right direction of where to go next. Because, like you said, Audrey, like very often people don't know what to do. They're just like, I don't know where to start. And start small. Don't feel bad if your child is in ninth grade and you haven't done anything up until this point, because it's not uncommon. And what I find is the older kids can learn a lot faster. So maybe your ninth graders on a third grade reading level, but within a year and a half to 2 years, we can get them up on an eighth to an 11th grade reading level. And the average American graduates high school on an eighth grade reading level. So our students who are way behind are usually graduating higher than the average American graduates reading on. So it's not too late. And just, you just have to let go of any guilt, because the guilt's not gonna to make things better.
Right. Definitely. Well said. Now, there are definitely some coming attractions. So I'm going to leave the website up there so you can have that. And there's like some great things other than your checklist and some things on your website. I'm noticing some books, and talk to us about what are your resources.
Yeah, so I wrote this book. I am not dumb. I am dyslexic. It's written in a very easy to read font. I just got a sweet thank you letter from someone who said, I just started reading the book, but I love all the space between the lines. And so it was written for dyslexic, potentially dyslexic parents in mind, because dyslexia is hereditary. And this book will give you some tips and tricks to help your child with dyslexia, dysgraphia, or dyscalculia, and also talks about the signs of dyslexia, famous people with dyslexia, and just anything you need to know as a parent who has a child who you think might be dyslexic. And then this little book, this is just a fun little book. It's called If Life Gives You Melons, You Might Be Dyslexic. And it's just inspirational quotes written mostly by other dyslexic people or people with ADHD. And then I've got some quotes in here too. So that's just a fun little book. And yeah, and we've got on my website, we have a couple of different digital programs that you can purchase. One of them is the math program that we teach our students. If it's not in their budget, they can, follow along. And it's mostly meant for homeschool parents because that's where my heart is. And if a homeschool parent is trying to, teach their child, but they just don't know how to do it. And then also we've got a really cool series, and it's for parents who are thinking of homeschooling their child. They don't even have to be neurodiverse children. There's just one section on neurodiversities, but I interviewed 10 different homeschool moms so you can get different perspectives on the homeschooling experience. I learned a ton. I'm already done homeschooling, but I learned a ton from these moms that I wish I had ideas outside of, just my own to homeschool my kids. So it has, it's 8 parts, and you can buy them individually or you can buy the whole set. And so that's like my baby. If you're thinking of homeschooling your child who is or is not struggling, and there's so many reasons to homeschool. It used to be considered like just the weirdos, but like some people are the athletes. The parents want to homeschool their kids so that they have more time for their children to focus on their athletic activities. Or actors. There's some people who they want their kids to be able to start acting. I knew a homeschool girl, and she was emancipated at like 14 so that she could work. She graduated. She was very driven. She graduated at 14. Her mom emancipated her so then she could work later hours than the under 18, and she could get more jobs acting. For me, I homeschooled each of my kids for different reasons. My first child I homeschooled because they asked to be homeschooled for 5 years because they had a lot of emotional challenges with just social anxiety. And I was like, no, I'm not going to homeschool for that reason, because then they're not going to learn to deal with the people. But that didn't help. It didn't get any better. It just got worse. And so that child went on to graduate at 16, and by 17 was teaching adults and children in a I always forget what it's called, but it's one of those programs where like they do wood shop and they learn 3D printing and all that
3D
different stuff.
printing. Oh, like Cat North for career technology type
It's
things.
it's the Hacker Lab is what, I don't know. That's where they, I guess, worked in Sacramento, the name of the
Mhm.
thing place. But anyway, and then at 18, they got their welding certification and was teaching
Sure.
welding to adults at that place. So, you know, trying to keep my child in school didn't make the experience better for that child. And then my youngest one, I started homeschooling when we left Texas, because of the dyslexia, and then found out that they couldn't do math either. The school never identified that at all, and
Mm.
they couldn't write. I mean, it was just the school had only picked up on the dyslexia, and so and then my daughter, who I had started homeschooling in kindergarten, if you remember,
Mhm.
she went to public school, um, magnet school, and then the at the magnet school it was a performing arts school, and she was doing great in her performing arts classes, in her any creative classes like sewing and dance and choir, but she was not doing well in math and English, and they weren't following any of her accommodations that she
Accommodations.
had in coming from Texas. So she just was like, I don't want to go anymore, homeschool me. And so I ended up homeschooling her because, you know, it wasn't worth it to stay in the school that she really loved and to be ridiculed by the teachers in her gen ed classes. So, so I homeschooled her last year. So it's funny. I homeschooled her first year and her last year.
Let's share.
But you know, there's so many reasons. Some people want to travel. I would have loved
Mm.
to world school my kids. My husband
Oh
was not
yeah.
on board with that. But that would be so fun. You learn about the world through travel. There's so many
Right.
options. So anyway, that's my baby. That is my program, and right now we have a special on that. It's only
Okay.
$297 for it. So,
Oh
you know,
wow.
pretty reasonable to get all of these tools, if you're thinking of homeschooling and just haven't wanted to make the plunge.
Yes, definitely. So again, here is the website. You got your 3dlearningexperts.com. You also can reach her via phone at 888-678-2482. I feel like that was my voice message for 888-678. So my thing is just thank you. Thank you so much for you have no idea how many people and lives that you have touched just by doing what you're doing each and every time. Because now you're basically having them, I want to say you're getting their voice back,
Mhm.
and by a lot of people, and hopefully soon enough people are going to understand that special education is not a disease. It's nothing that you have to fear. It's just a part of you, but at the same time have people like Jess, like myself, like my friend Kathy, to kind of assist you to grow into that person that you want to be, because every child has greatness. And by having this assistance, now people can really show their gifts and not be ashamed of it and be able to go and grow. And I think the work that you're doing, I love it. And I know there's so many people that love and appreciate you for doing it. So thank you. I'm not sure if anyone thanks you today, but it's going to be me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Audrey. I appreciate that. And I love that you do this podcast with two tutors. I think that's awesome and very much needed. So, thank you.
Not a problem. Just how we have a community. That's what it is. It's just a matter of, as we can see, we got East Coast and West Coast, and there is no butting. No one's like fighting. It's a beautiful thing. So, for all the people that are here, one, I want to say thank you so much for being here. And please continue to do the work that you're doing, because I don't want to say that you're a superhero, but you're a superhero because you're doing a lot of things that a lot of other teachers want to do, but just can't. and you're taking the plunge by doing the tutoring and breaking down concepts to help young men and young women to be in their greatness. I just wanted to say thank you all for being here, and stay tuned for the next Two Tutors Talking, which will be happening the following Thursday. All right, have a lovely day, and we'll talk to you soon.